Everyone ignored the desert lot until a buried Bible revealed a veteran's final wish. Nobody wanted the lot. That was the part Earl Bennett remembered most clearly. Not the auctioneer's voice, not the rows of folding chairs inside the county building, not even the cheap price written beside the parcel number. What Earl remembered was the silence, because when the abandoned desert lot came up for bid, nobody raised a hand. Not one person. The auctioneer read the description quickly, like even he knew it was a waste of time. 1,700 square feet of dry Colorado dirt. No house, no utilities, no paved road, no obvious value. Just a forgotten little rectangle of land on the edge of an old mining town, sitting beneath a sky so wide it made everything else feel small. Someone in the back of the room chuckled. Another man shook his head. And when the auctioneer moved on, it seemed like that was the end of it. But Earl Bennett kept looking at the paper in his hand. He did not know why. Maybe it was the location. Maybe it was the old parcel number. Maybe it was just the feeling he sometimes got when a piece of forgotten land seemed to be asking one more question before disappearing forever. So when the lot came back up in the secondary round, the round where the county lowered the price just to get old tax properties off the books, Earl raised his hand. The auctioneer looked surprised. A few people turned around. Someone laughed under his breath. And Earl bought the land for less than most people spend on a used lawnmower. By the time he walked out of the building, half the room probably thought he had made a mistake. And maybe he had. At least that was what Earl thought when he drove out to see the property the following weekend. The lot sat about 40 minutes outside Westcliff, near the edge of what used to be a mining community. There were still traces of that old life scattered across the area if you knew where to look. Collapsed structures, rusting metal, forgotten claims, names of men who once came chasing silver, copper, and the promise of a better life. But Earl's lot had none of that. No mine entrance, no cabin, no fence, no sign that anyone had cared about it in years. Just scrub grass, cracked soil, and a distant view of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Beautiful, yes. Useful, no. Earl stood there with his boots in the dust and almost laughed at himself. Maybe everyone at the auction had been right. Maybe he had bought nothing. But Earl was not the kind of man who judged land only by what he saw from the road. He had been attending county tax sales for about 6 years by then. He was not rich. He was not a developer. He did not show up at auctions wearing a suit and making big promises. He liked puzzles, that was all. Forgotten properties, old records, bad descriptions, loose ends. Most of the time, those puzzles led nowhere but headaches and paperwork. But every once in a while, a forgotten piece of land had a story buried beneath it. So Earl walked the edges. He checked the description against his phone. He looked for old markers. He studied the corners. And in the southeast corner of the lot, he noticed something strange. The ground dipped slightly. Not much, just enough to make him stop. The soil looked different there, softer, sunken, like something under the surface had settled over time. Earl stared at it for a minute. Then he told himself it was probably erosion. High desert soil does strange things after years of wind, rain, freezing nights, and brutal sun. He took 3 steps away, then stopped. Something made him turn back. Earl always kept a folding shovel in his truck. It was an old habit from years of checking fence lines, buried markers, and forgotten survey stakes. He went back, got the shovel, and returned to the southeast corner. The first few inches were hard, dry, packed tight by time. But after that, the soil changed. At about 18 inches down, the shovel struck something solid. Not rock, not metal, wood. Earl froze. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving across the empty lot. He knelt down and cleared the dirt away by hand. The object was small, wrapped in rotting oilcloth, and packed tightly into the ground like someone had placed it there with care. Earl lifted it out slowly. The cloth was ruined around the edges, but the center had held. Inside was a Bible, an old King James Bible. Thick, heavy, leather cover cracked and darkened almost black. The kind of Bible that looked like it had survived more than one lifetime. Earl sat down right there in the dirt. He opened the front cover carefully, afraid the pages would fall apart in his hands. The paper was brittle, the ink was faded, but the handwriting inside was clear. Walter Greer, 1962. Below that, written in the same careful hand, was one sentence. "The land belongs to the one who remembers." Earl read it once, then again, then a third time. The land belongs to the one who remembers. That was not a legal document. Earl knew that. It was not a deed. It was not a will. It was not something a county clerk could simply stamp and accept. But it was not nothing either. A man had buried this Bible for a reason. A man named Walter Greer had wanted someone to find it, and Earl had just bought the land where it was buried. Most people would have taken the Bible home, cleaned it up, and kept it as a strange story. Maybe they would have posted a photo online. Maybe they would have put it on a shelf. Maybe they would have said, "Look what I found on that worthless lot." But Earl could not do that. Not yet, because the name was now stuck in his mind. Walter Greer. Who was he? Why had he buried a Bible? And who was supposed to remember him? That question took Earl back to the county clerk's office. At first, the clerks were polite but skeptical. People came in all the time with strange theories about old land, lost deeds, buried treasure, family rumors, mining claims they believed had been stolen by some long-dead official. But Earl did not come in waving a conspiracy. He came in with a Bible, a name, a year, and a parcel number. That was enough to begin. For the next several weeks, Earl spent more time in county records than he did at home. He traced the lot backward through tax sales, quiet title actions, transfers, and old ownership lists. The property had passed through several hands over the decades, but the deeper he went, the more one name kept reappearing: Walter Greer. In 1958, Walter had purchased the lot from the estate of a defunct mining operation. The deed was clean, the purchase was recorded. Walter owned the land outright, no mortgage, no partner, no company behind him. Just one man buying a small piece of Colorado dirt. That alone did not explain the Bible. So Earl kept digging. State archives gave him the next piece. Walter Greer had served in the United States Army during the Korean War. He came home, settled in Colorado, and worked odd jobs around the mining industry. He never married. He had no children listed in public records. And when he died in 1974, there was no formal will filed with the county. The little lot eventually slid into unpaid taxes, legal confusion, and neglect. Decades passed, owners changed, records blurred, and whatever Walter had intended was buried right along with that Bible. Until Earl found something else. It was not in the clean digital records. It was not in the easy files. It was buried in a poorly scanned document packet from the early 1970s. The kind of scan most people would skip because half the page was dark and the other half was nearly unreadable. Earl almost missed it, but one word caught his eye: nephew. He leaned closer to the screen. Then his hands went still. The document was an informal deed of transfer, not properly notarized, not properly filed, not legally complete in the way it needed to be. But the handwriting matched the Bible. Walter Greer had written it himself, and in that document he named a boy, Thomas Greer, his nephew. The paper said the land was to go to Thomas when Walter died. Not because the land was valuable, not because it was part of some large estate, but because Thomas had spent summers with him, because Thomas had listened to his stories, because Thomas had promised he would remember him. Earl sat back in the chair and felt a chill run through him. The sentence in the Bible suddenly made sense. The land belongs to the one who remembers. Walter had not been writing to a stranger. He had been writing to Thomas. The problem was that Thomas Greer would be an old man now if he was still alive at all, and finding him would not be easy. Earl reached out to a genealogy researcher he knew in Pueblo, a woman who could follow family lines through census records, church books, obituaries, and old addresses better than anyone he had ever met. It took her less than 2 weeks. Thomas Greer was alive, retired, widowed, living in Alamosa, and completely unaware that his uncle Walter had tried to leave him anything. Earl later said the phone call was one of the strangest moments of his life. Because how do you call a man in his late 70s and tell him you found a Bible buried in the dirt? How do you explain that his uncle may have left him land 60 years ago? How do you convince someone you are not trying to scam him? At first, Thomas barely spoke. Earl told him about the auction, the lot, the southeast corner, the oilcloth, the Bible, the name inside. Then Earl mentioned Walter Greer. That was when Thomas interrupted him. "My Uncle Walt?" His voice changed when he said it, softer, careful. like he had just opened a door in his memory that had been closed for decades. Thomas remembered him. He remembered summer visits. He remembered the dry wind and the mountain views. He remembered riding with Walter in an old truck that smelled like dust, coffee, and machine oil. He remembered Walter talking about the war only in small pieces, never all at once. And he remembered something Walter used to tell him whenever they stood out near the edge of the desert. A man only disappears when nobody remembers his name. Thomas had not thought about that sentence in years. Now Earl was calling him about a buried Bible that said almost the same thing. The land belongs to the one who remembers. For a while, neither man said much. Then Thomas asked the question Earl had been expecting. What happens now? That part was complicated. Because Earl had bought the land legally at auction, the county had sold it, the paperwork was in his name. Walter's informal deed had never been properly completed, and more than half a century had passed. Legally, Earl may not have owed Thomas anything, but morally he could not ignore what he had found. He met with an estate attorney, then a property attorney, then the county. The Bible alone was not enough. The informal deed alone was not enough. But together, along with the genealogy records, Walter's ownership history, and Thomas's connection to him, they told a story that was hard to dismiss. Still, it took months. There were questions about the chain of title, questions about whether Walter's intent mattered after so much time, questions about whether the lot could even be transferred cleanly without creating new problems. One attorney told Earl he had every legal right to keep it. Another said most people would. But Earl could not get past one thing. Walter had buried that Bible for someone, and Earl did not believe that someone was him. Finally, after the paperwork was reviewed and the transfer path was cleared, Earl signed a quitclaim deed conveying the property to Thomas Greer. He did not ask for payment. He did not turn it into a negotiation. He simply gave back what he believed was never meant to be his. Before the transfer was finalized, Thomas came to see the lot. He arrived with his daughter and 2 grandchildren. Earl met them near the edge of the old mining road and walked them out to the property. The land looked the same as it had the day Earl first saw it. Dry, small, quiet, forgotten by almost everyone. But Thomas did not see it that way. He walked slowly to the southeast corner, the same place where Earl had found the Bible. For a long time he just stood there. The mountains rose in the distance. The wind moved through the brush. His grandson asked if this was really where the Bible had been buried. Thomas nodded. Then he looked at Earl and said, "He used to bring me places like this." Earl handed him the Bible. Thomas took it with both hands. His fingers moved gently over the cracked leather cover, and for the first time since Earl had known him, Thomas cried. Not because the land was worth a fortune. It was not. Not because he had suddenly become rich. He had not. He cried because a man he thought had faded into the past had reached across 60 years and kept a promise. Walter Greer had not left behind much. No mansion, no bank account that anyone knew of, no great estate, just a small piece of land, a buried Bible, and one final message to the boy who had once promised to remember him. That was the inheritance. Not the dirt, not the parcel number, not the deed. The inheritance was proof that Thomas had mattered to Walter. Proof that Walter had tried to leave him something. Proof that memory can outlive paperwork, silence, and time. Before they left, Thomas's daughter took a picture of him standing on the lot, holding the Bible against his chest. Behind him, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains stood blue and still in the distance. Thomas looked at the land one last time and said quietly, "I thought he forgot." But Walter had not forgotten. He had buried the proof where the land itself could keep it safe. And somehow, after all those years, it found its way back. That is the strange thing about old land. It holds more than dirt. It holds promises. It holds grief. It holds the names of people who worked it, walked it, loved it, and left pieces of themselves behind. Records can be lost. Families can drift apart. Courthouses can misfile papers. But sometimes the ground remembers what people forget. And sometimes all it takes is one man with a folding shovel, one forgotten lot nobody wanted, and one buried Bible wrapped in oilcloth to bring a lost promise back into the light. So if your family has old land, old letters, old records, or stories that were never fully explained, do not be so quick to dismiss them. The thing everyone calls worthless may be the thing holding the truth. The smallest parcel may carry the heaviest memory. And the most valuable thing buried in the ground may not be gold, silver, or anything that glitters. Sometimes it is a name. Sometimes it is a promise. Sometimes it is a Bible in the dirt, waiting for the person who still remembers. If you enjoy stories about forgotten inheritances, hidden records, and family secrets buried in plain sight, subscribe to Hidden Legacy Files, because sometimes the past is not gone. It is just waiting to be found.